without further ado, let me welcome Dr. Luri Sofyan. Dr. Luri Sofyan has participated in a presentation earlier last year. I think it was in August or July for his research, very interesting, on nudging people to wash their hands. So today the presentation will also be on behavioral economics, if we can say that, with the title of "Does the shift from autocracy to democracy in Indonesia change people's behavior?" And this FKP is also supported by the Indonesia Behavioral Economics Forum. I believe this is a new-ish organization or a network. Maybe Paluri also can explain that later. Before I forgot, maybe you have seen it already. Paluri is associated or affiliated with the Ministry of Finance, Directorate General of Taxes, I believe, and also with Nudge Plus. So, Paluri, the time and space is yours. I usually have the presentation for about 40 minutes and then followed by Q&A.
Thank you, Bu Lydia, for the warm introductions. I think I need somehow to share the screen, if you may. Okay, but first of all, I want to say hi to Pak Budi Sudarmo. I'm a big fan of him, so hello, Pak Budi. And I also want to say hi to everybody. So yes, my name is Luri Sofyan. Now I work in Ministry of Finance in DGT. So I'm a public officer. And today I'm going to share a working paper. Actually, this is not a finished product. A working paper with Professor Kimura and Pia Weiss from University of Nottingham. So I think hopefully I can learn from you and you can learn from me as well. So this is a really good opportunity for us to be able to learn each other. And so yeah, the project that I'm in is actually about behavior. So the title is quite provoking. Does the shift from autocracy to democracy in Indonesia change people's behavior? And let me first start the presentations by presenting this graph. So in 2016, there was a paper by Getcher.
Recording in progress.
And this paper actually, they found an interesting fact that somehow institutions quality is correlate with the level of honesty of people. So this paper published in a good high-ranked journal in Nature Science journal, and basically they found that those people who lives in a country where the institution quality is better, they are more honest compared to those who lives in a country where institutional quality is not really good. So what I mean by institutions here is actually refers to two type of institutions, which is formal institutions, including laws and rules, and the second one is informal institutions, which is culture. So this paper quite interesting because somehow they can correlate between the quality of institutions and day-to-day behavior of individual. And after reading this paper, somehow it hooked me up and my fellow research as well, so that we try to understand more the relationship between institutions and behavior. In particular, we want to understand what happens if there is a change in institutions, how it will affect behavior. And we found that this area of research is actually quite extensive area of research, and and lots of people have been a prominent researcher have found lots of interesting finding. And in this slide, I will give a brief uh, important findings to show you that um, institutions and behavior is an interesting research area to dig on, and somehow it also relates to Indonesia. So basically, when we said about institutional change, um, the change could be in many forms, right? And one of them is political shifting. That is one form of institutional change. And one of interesting finding that that quite provoking is actually from Acemoglu and Robinson 2008, that they found that political shiftings influence economic performance. Although this political the the effect of political shiftings towards economic performance could be different from one country to another. Let's say in the UK, they give a better economic performance, but in Latin America, they don't really boost economic performance. And we also have this legendary political economic science, Robert Putnam. He also studied about the relationship between institutions and behavior. He found that in Italy, that those people who live in weaker institutions are lying more compared to those who live in the northern part of Italy. And another research that also highlight the relationship between institutions and behavior is Fisman and Miguel. They also uh, present a quite interesting finding that um, basically those diplomats who stay in the New York city can be predicted. The corrupting the corrupt behavior of those people, those diplomats who live in New York City, can be predicted from their original country. So those diplomats uh, who came from countries that are more corrupt, they violate more rule in the New York City. In particular, they talk about parking rules. So those are some of studies that try to relate institutions and behavior. And I can go on like probably 1 day or 2 days to explain to recap all of the studies in institutions and behavior. But if I try to recap those studies, um, we can end up with these two competing theories of how institutions affect behavior. So the first one is called conformist transformation theory by Bowles 2004. And the second one is called sticky behavior theory. So this graph shows us the, the simulation when an institution change. So you can see here that from the left side, there's a red circle that is showing on old institutions. So we assume here that the old institution is not really good, and then it shifts to a green bubbles, which is a new, better institutions. And from the standpoint of conformist transformation theory, when a subject or an individual they face this changing of institutions, the individual, when they interact with the new, better institutions, they will try to adapt their behavior into what the new institutions is required. So they adapt to the new institutions. On the other hand, the sticky behavior theory, they argue that it is difficult to change behavior because behavior is sticky. So no matter where they live, those individuals will still behave the same as they were before. So new, better institution does not necessarily change people's behavior. So this competing theories is actually quite interesting, and if we look at further, this is actually the long debate between nature and nurture that we always have, and and that's also bring me to understand more in what kind of behavior that is influenced by institutions. Like previously, I mentioned the study from Getcher. They study about intrinsic honesty, and they try to compare intrinsic honesty of participants between different countries, and they found that intrinsic honesty is really shaped by the quality of institutions. And and we also interested in intrinsic honesty because this is a really, really beautiful concept, and I think this is also important in many aspects. So here, I want to touch a bit of what is intrinsic honesty real about. So when we talk about intrinsic honesty, it is actually deeper than honesty itself. So intrinsic honesty is a form of honesty that triggered by self motivations. So people will still behave honestly no matter what happened, although in the absence of monitoring system. And to give you a better idea of what intrinsic honesty is, I'll show you this picture of traffic in Jakarta. I think we experience this every day that we always have to make a decision whether we want to violate the rules or not in order to get faster to um, our destinations. And here you can see that the car, he or she, the drivers itself, um, the driver break the rules, although he, the driver noticed that there is a sign of not making a U-turn. So probably the behavior will become different if there is a policeman standing there. So it means that the level of intrinsic honesty of the driver is not that good because he needs somebody or external motivations for him to be to become an honest person. So intrinsic honesty does not require a monitoring system to do honest behavior. That's the difference. And also, when you find, let's say, a handphone on the street, uh, the only thing that motivates you to give the handphone back to the owner is intrinsic honesty, because there's no way, there's no system that could detect that you do lie. You keep the handphone for yourself. There's no system that could do that. So, intrinsic honesty is important in day-to-day behavior, but also in larger discussions in, let's say, in corruptions. Somehow intrinsic honesty also important, like especially in developing country. If we talk about the capacity of developing countries to detect corruption is quite low, in that sense that people, if they have higher level of intrinsic honesty, they will still behave honest no matter uh, knowing that the detection system is not in place. So intrinsic honesty also relate to corruptions and of course with taxations, because most of tax authority in the world, they are obsessed with the concept of tax voluntary compliance. So the the idea is taxpayer, they willing to comply, they willing to tell honest about their income and paying tax without having to get audited. So those kind of example bring us give us motivations to understand intrinsic honesty and how it actually interact with institutions. So we want to know if the political shiftings influence honesty. And previous literature mentions that um, intrinsic honesty of individual is shaped by day-to-day behavior, by the experience of individuals. If they found positive norms in their day-to-day interactions with the society, they will internalize that positive behavior into their belief, and it becomes so-called intrinsic honesty. And we have this hypothesis that if the institution change somehow into democratic system, okay, somehow it will bring a positive value to the society, which in turns it will stimulate intrinsic honesty. So the shifting from, let's say, autocracy to democracy should boost intrinsic honesty of individual who live within that countries. And this slide shows some points of why democracy bring positive value, because of course we know that democracy, they put transparency and accountability at priority. So yeah, it's well, the literature mentions that democracy is better compared to autocracy in terms of checks and balance and transparency and accountability that I just mentioned earlier. And having said that, we also want to understand that institutions is not only about formal and informal institutions, but also we could see institutions as two different groups of institutions, which is first one we call that fast moving institutions, and the second one is slow moving institutions. What it means by fast moving institutions is those institutions that could change rapidly. And actually, this is referred to political shifting. In the case of Arab Spring, for example, or what happened in 1998 in Indonesia, the riot, the change from autocracy regime to reform era democratic regimes could happen just overnight. But on the other hand, slow moving institutions refers to culture. So although at the top level, political institutions could change rapidly, but culture is difficult to change. In some cases, culture only can change. It can change, take probably decades or even centuries for a culture to be evolved. So we also want to know the interactions between these fast-moving institutions, which is the political change, and slow-moving institution, which is culture. And 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 now we want to see the context of Indonesia, of course. And we can see here above the timeline, the story of how Indonesian political system changed since the age of kingdom until the reform era in 1998. So we have experienced a lot of changes, the colonialism, the pre-independent era, and then we have independency, we have a Sukarno era, the Orde Lama, and then Orde Baru, and then changed to reform era in 1998. So this change, political shifting, like I said before, is called fast-moving institutions. But the questions is whether this fast-moving institution is going to change people's behavior, knowing that there is another aspect of so-called slow-moving institutions that they don't change probably in since the age of kingdom until now. Okay, so I'll show you some of example of slow-moving institutions here, which is the culture that stay probably also culture that is shaped by distant political institutions, like the concept of Kaula Gusti, which is reflects the unity between the Kaulo, the servant, and the Gusti of which is the Lord. So it reflects how Indonesians perceive a relationship between the servant and the Lord. So they have to always serve the Lord in many ways, and that somehow give to the perceptions of paternalistic form of political leadership. And that kind of thinking is usually shaped by distance political, probably as far as Age of Kingdom, but still, it is still exists today. It doesn't change or since. And we also have this point of view of how individual is always owe their life to their family. So once they become a person, they reach certain level in the society, they have to give back to their family, which also this probably some literature mentions this is the seeds of nepotism. And we also have this habit of giving a gift to the ruler. This is the kind of culture that has been occurred since the age of kingdom, and until now, I think this is still valid, and many more, many more, many more. So we want to know how these fast-moving institutions interact with slow-moving institutions, and how it changed the behavior, in particular, intrinsic honesty in Indonesia. So to recap, to give you a broader concept of the research that we are doing at the moment is actually um, we are trying to portray, to capture how this institution shift, change behavior, and then we will focus on intrinsic honesty. Why intrinsic honesty? Because I explained that previously, and here I want to emphasize that the problem with intrinsic honesty is the data of intrinsic honesty is really really difficult to get uh, if it is not impossible. Okay, so measuring intrinsic honesty is a challenge. So we try to identify some of the measurement to intrinsic honesty, and then we found some tools in experimental economics. But then somehow we propose a new method to capture intrinsic honesty by so-called the mind game. I will explain that the next slide. So basically, the research is about again to measure the intrinsic honesty between uh, generations of people who exposed to autocracy compared to those generation who does not expose to autocracy regime, and that would give indications of what how this political shifting could affect behavior, in particular intrinsic honesty. And so I will show you how we capture the intrinsic honesty. So this is a type of typical of experimental economics. So basically we gather participants and then we give them a simple game. So the game is called the mind game. So we tell them to think of a number between 0 and 9. Okay, and then after that they were asked to remember uh, that number that they choose in their head. After that, we random a number between the same range from 0 to 9 and then show the selected number on their screen. Okay? And then we ask a simple question whether the number that they think of is the same with the number that what the computer shows in the screen. Okay? They can answer two choices. They can say yes, the number is the same. If they choose yes, then they will get money, real money. If they choose no, they won't give any money. So from the design of the game, it is obvious that if participants want to maximize their utility, they will always say yes, no matter what happened, no matter the number that is shown by the computer is different with the number that they have in their head, they will always choose yes. And 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 this is a challenge, a challenge for participants to stay honest. And if they say no, it means that they are honest. Because well, I will explain the probability of being become honest or dishonest, but basically the chance to have the same number is so small, only 10% compared to 90% to have different numbers. But then we design that with 10 repetitions. So you can imagine if someone say yes for 10 in a row, the probability is really small to get the same number 10 times in a row, which indicates that the person is actually lying. So yeah, the games could detect the lie at the group level as well as individual level. And the games also somehow remove the fear of detections, which in our opinion is endowed by the previous measurements of intrinsic honesty, because there's no artifact to detect that the subject is lying, because all the process have occurred in their mind, so there's no way to prove whether they are lying or not. We can prove it, of course, by seeing the data, but in the real game there is no way to detect someone is lying or someone is not, because it happens inside participants' mind. I hope that give brief explanation of the experimental method. And so how are we going to answer the recent questions? So how political shifting affect intrinsic honesty? That's the main research questions. And we did that by selecting different group of participants. So there are three groups to be compared. The first one is Jiang, are those who born in 1998 when the change, the political shifting occurred in 1998 or later. So these groups of people are those who never seen Suharto as president, right? And then we compare their level of intrinsic honesty to those who are in G2 and G3. G2 is those who are have the age a maximum 14 years old in 1998. So why we choose 14 years? Because 14 is the age where Indonesian students reach the secondary schools, and also 14 is perceived as the average age for a young girl to reach adulthood, because they they experience menarche. And the G3 is to accommodate those participants who reach adulthood in terms of legal standing, because they will get KTP, right? Kartu Tanda Penduduk. So we compare these two group of students, and then it's a pretty step forward actually, and the result is okay. So we use experimental method, and as it's shown in the screen, that the participant is not too much, because it's quite expensive to give people money, and we managed to recruit 215 Indonesian students, and we also at the same time recruit British students as a control group, because we think that British students, they don't experience this political shifting. So the hypothesis is that British students will have the same intrinsic honesty level, no matter if we compare the British from G1, G2, and G3, the level of intrinsic honesty will be the same, because there's no political shifting occurred in the UK. And this is also a part of another project. So I also have different type of respondent, but for the sake of today's discussion, I just chose the one that is relevant to today's topic. And so, how many minutes do I have, Lydia?
I think you can have 10 to 12
Okay.
minutes, Pak.
Okay, thank you. So I will go down to the main result of the finding. So as I mentioned earlier, that our game could detect lying behavior at group level. So we can compare Indonesians and British, let's say. Here you can see that on average, Indonesians they claim almost around 30% uh, saying claiming yes. So okay, claiming yes, and then the British actually they claim more yeses compared to Indonesians, but theoretically, the probability of having the same number is actually 10%. So we assume that those who claim above 10% are actually lying. Okay, uh, probably in Indonesian case there are participants who claim zero. Probably some of them claim 10 yeses to get the optimum payment. But on average, Indonesians claim is around 30%, still below the British. Okay, which actually this is a good sign showing that Indonesians are more honest compared to British. But anyway, this has not been answered the research question. So we want to compare between G1, G2, and G3. So different groups of students who are exposed to different political regime. And here, first of all, we can see that. Oh, sorry. Uh, so here we see that you can focus on the second line, Indonesian. We found that difference of lying or claiming yes for Indonesians is actually significantly different between G1 and G2. Okay, so the younger people is actually lie more. So those who live in democratic regime who born in 1998 lie more compared to those people who lives in autocratic regime G2 and G3. And that's the first finding. The second one is that uh, we see that the difference between G2 and G3 is not that significant, which indicates that when Indonesian students they reach um, adulthood era, the behavior become more honest. That's the how we perceive the data, and and that's not really the overall conclusions that we can take from the data. We want to know also how they lie at individual levels. So the game could give us flexibility to see whether a person is actually lying or not, and we also introduce this concept of so-called partially honest. So they don't lie to the fullest. They don't really maximize their utility by saying that all the numbers are the same, but they don't also tell the truth, saying that okay, the number is only one or two same, but they also claim like more than the theoretical probability study is. So here we can see that most of Indonesian students who are young, the G1, most of them claim, most of them are a partially honest person. So 88% of them claim not to the fully dishonest to claim the optimum payment, but also not declare honestly 100%. So they are belong to most of them are belong to partially honest participants. But compared to Indonesians who born in G2 or 1 to 14 years old when the shifting changed in 1998, the partially honest students getting less, and somehow it shows that when Indonesian people get older, they become more honest in a way that those partially honest behavior might shift their behavior to become more honest, and it somehow this behavior stay the same when they reach more adult age, 17 years old above. Okay, so it seems that political shifting, the hypothesis that democracy uh, provide a positive way of life, that the check and balance system is exists, that the law is enacted and then held by everybody, is not really affecting the intrinsic honesty of Indonesian students. And it shows that even those who are younger is actually more claim more yes, which indicate lie more compared to G2 and G3. But when they get older, when they reach the G2 group area, the lie behavior becomes stable. Although until they reach the G3, the level of the behavior of the honesty behavior is still the same. So some of them still claim partially honest, and some of them still fully honest. But the difference is not really significant. So the significant difference only can be found by comparing to the younger generations. And that's does not answer the whole question actually, because we want to know as well, because probably the old generations, they don't claim yes, they don't maximize their utility because they have more income, right? uh, and we want to test that by using negative binomial regressions that uh, we, we can see that some of the variables are significant, such as the status, marital status. Those who are single are claim more yeses compared to, so yeah, those who are single claim more yeses, which indicate more dishonest compared to married participants. And we also want to know the relationship between cognitive ability with the honesty behavior, which this result shows a counterfactual evidence that usually the CRT, cognitive representation tests, have a positive relationship with honesty, dishonest behavior. So the more you are clever, actually, you are more cunning, and then you want to get more money, and then you are willing to sacrifice your honesty behavior to get the money. But here we found that those who have higher CRT, they claim less yeses, which means they are more honest. And then we also measure the interaction time in the social media, which uh, here we can say that those participants who are more socialized, they have more friends in YouTube, in Facebook, in Instagram, and Twitter. They more exposed to social media. They are more dishonest compared to those who don't. And in terms of political point of view, we also found that those who are conservative are more dishonest compared to more liberal point of view. And income, and we find no significant effect of income to dishonest behavior.
Sorry, Pak Luri, I think the slide is cut off at the bottom, so
Okay.
people cannot see. But just want to let everyone know also that the slides are in the Dropbox if you want to see, and the link to that is in the chat box.
Yeah. Thank you, Lydia. Yeah, the rest of the slide is just showing the income effect actually. So we find no significant effect of income towards the claim of yeses. And I think yeah, this slide bring us to the last slide of today's presentations, that well, the hypothesis of that we lied at the beginning of the presentation, saying that democracy is better because it shows better accountability and transparency, and it put positive norm into the society, and it will bring people become more honest. Is actually not a straightforward questions to answer. So we find no relationship between democracy and intrinsic honesty. And some of literature actually try to understand the relationship between institutions and honesty in a different way. That is not the institutions who shapes honest behavior. It is actually uh, to have a better institutions, let's say a good democracy, it is required an honest people within that country, or in another term, a better social capital within that country in order to have a better institution. So which influence which is also matter here. And in Indonesia case, we this is also an interesting to discuss that we know that we try to move from autocracy to democracy, and we think it is a good things to do because it gives a positive value to the whole society. But then somehow it just occurred at the formal level, and the question is how to influence those institutions who are slowly moving, which is the culture. Because although the political the change in politics is always occurred since the age of kingdom, but then the culture is still the same. So how to disrupt this negative slow moving institutions, which is culture? Of course, this is a big question, whether we want to change the culture, especially negative culture that probably uh, uh, does not really coherent with the idea of let's say integrity. Okay, are we going to the habit of giving gift to the rulers, or is that a right thing to do, or not? So this is probably we should ask these questions to ourselves as Indonesians, and how are we going to, let's say, to stop nepotism, because it is within our cultural root that we always give priority to our family, uh, even put the state interest below the family interest. And yeah, and anyway, the next provocating discussion probably uh, the idea of shifting political the idea of political change between democracy and autocracy does not actually influencing the culture, the slow moving institutions, but how if someone or Indonesians citizens is exposed to a really new type of institutions in terms of political institution and culture. We've seen that what happened with PDP, they send students abroad is actually try to simulating this, that Indonesian students they exposed to a new culture and new political institutions. Both are really new, and this is also an interesting research ahead to measure whether those practice could probably also change Indonesian behavior to become more honest. And I also want to highlight that in some cases when we have a research agenda, the resource to get the empirical data is so limited, and this is give you probably an example, an early example of how to harvest the benefit of experimental method, um, because somehow experimental method could give you a benefit to capture the data that uh, difficult or impossible to be grabbed by conventional method. And of course, limitations. Also want to highlight that because we are using experimental method, we have a quite limited number of participants, and by saying that, it's also need a careful attention if we want to generalize the finding into Indonesian people as a whole. And the next research agenda, probably this is also interesting because when we talk about experimental method, we can always think of another aspect of life and search some of the research that can be fulfilled by conventional method because of the lack access of data. And I think that's hopefully give you a bit of summarize of the research that we've done so far, and we are keen to get feedback, comments, or questions. Back to you, Bu Lydia. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Luri, and certainly very interesting research. Simple structure for the game, but the result is quite surprising indeed. So I see one question in the Q&A box, but before we take questions, please, I will let you know that you can write it in the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand. Oh, I see Pak Budi raising his hand now. You can raise your hand, and we will take your let you ask the question directly. So Pak Fajri Siregar has a few questions. I think some of these can be answered through the presentation earlier because Pak Fajri wrote the question quite early in the presentation. Pak Fajri, if you would like to have further question, could you probably raise your hand so that I can open the mic so you can ask the question directly and there's more interaction, for example, interactive discussion. So in the meanwhile, Pak Budi, the time is yours if you would like to ask a question.
Okay. Thank you first of all, thank you very much for Luri for an interesting presentation. So I thought the idea is great, but I kind of miss the detail or the precision of what how you actually could argue whether institution could actually change people behavior. So number one is on institution change. So it is for me, it's hard to believe that institution is actually could have a shock, a big change suddenly. What we could see probably the formal change. So for example, when Indonesia moved to decentralization, by the law that published in 1999, it was the formalization of the change. But before that, there could be gradual change toward those formalization. So exactly what point that you could actually argue that this is a change, a big change, and so on, it is arguable. Second is that it seemed to me that you mix between honesty and conducting a positive action. So, for example, when your example, you show that somebody seeing that you cannot U-turn, and in fact, the person doing U-turn, it doesn't have anything about honesty. That's tell nothing about honesty. It just tell about whether the person is actually comply with the regulation or not. And compliant with the regulation doesn't have anything with honesty. Yeah. So so the mechanism that you're going to test between democracy, honesty, and doing the right thing doesn't seem to be have a nice red so a nice flow because it is for me it's that honesty doesn't have anything to do with comply to regulation or not. Yeah. So let the example, for example, people doesn't like regulation, and it doesn't doesn't like regulation is supposed to be honest on that. He would not comply to the regulation. If somebody disagree with the regulation, supposed not to comply with the regulation. The fact that the action is I comply to the regulation doesn't mean that the person is actually honest. So that part is confusing for me. Now, finally, on the empirical work that you present, it seemed to me very difficult to argue that you actually get even robust relationship between the date of someone born with being honest. Oh, on the experiment, there's one thing that I would like to argue on experiment. Your assumption is that when somebody was asked between 0 to what number that you think between 0 to 9, you assume that every number has the same probability in one mind. How could you argue that? There is no, what is the evidence that when somebody said that within 0 to 9 that people actually, all this number we didn't come up with our mind has a probability, has the same probability. And that's difficult to argue. It could be that it's not the same probability. Now, and finally, your empirical result, I think it suffer omitted variable bias a lot. So what you have is a bias result that it is difficult to argue whether those actually even a robust correlation because the shock is not exogenous and the way that you pick, I'm not sure whether it is random or not. So yeah, that is my opinion. Thank you. But again, it is an interesting topic, and we would like to see more work on that. Thank you.
Since it's a lot of comments, maybe Pak Luri can address them first before we move on to the next ones. Thanks, Pak.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Pak Budi, for the comments and input and question as well. So to be honest, this is like quite a topical research area, and lots of study try to approach this typical of research questions by using different methodology, and most of them they use qualitative method, and some of them they use like empirical method using corruptions data and how the institutional change affects, let's say, the corruptions in one country, and in particular in Indonesia. I think that kind of research has been quite a lot. Pak Hadis is one of the prominent scholar who did that for quite some times, and we also pick up some of interesting research using experimental method, and we noticed that the challenge is huge, in particular when we talk about. But of course, I agree that you mentioned that although we shift from autocracy to democracy, or even when we agree to have decentralizations in place in Indonesia, but then it needs sometimes for the impact really get into the root of the society, and I agree that, and even I think that's one of the explanations that I want to highlight, that when we talk about culture, it seems that what happens with political shifting does not really translate into the shifting of culture to become a better culture in a way that promote integrity, for example. Okay, and first of all, I agree with that it needs some times for for institutional change in terms of political change to be translated into real behavior, to change people's behavior. And the challenge here is actually to put that way of thinking in the design of the experiment, because uh, we think that the only way to see the impact of institutional changes is by comparing different groups of people who are exposed to different institutions. It might be more accurate, more holistic if we could have access to participants, let's say, who have older age compared to those who are, let's say, uh, really young, and we have difficulties to gain the access to the type of participants. It could give a better spectrums of what happens in Indonesia from time to time, and how political shift change intrinsic honesty. And yes, I think this is a good, in fact, input from Pak Budi about the concept of intrinsic motivations, intrinsic honesty. And as I think I should make it more clear that at the beginning, I am a bit mixed up between intrinsic motivations and intrinsic honesty. Well, basically, intrinsic honesty is a form of intrinsic motivations. The pictures that I show you showing intrinsic motivations to follow the rules, and when we talk about between honesty behavior and following the rules, is not the same the same type of behavior. To some extent, I agree with that, but I also want to point it out that if someone breaks the rules and then he or she admit that he break the rules, then it's also a form of honesty. And and the next thing is I think about the probability of number from 0 to 9. I think we assume that if someone is told to think about a number from 0 to 9, then actually it doesn't really matter. It's like a rolling dice, right? Well, when we roll a dice, it has 6 sides dice, and then the probability of each sides to be at the top is actually same for each sides, right? And this is actually the previous tools that previous researchers developed to capture intrinsic honesty by using roll dice. But uh, in in the game that we design, we use the mind game because we think it is more secure in terms of fear of detections, because we want to make sure that participants really feel comfortable when they tell something that lies, right? And I think it is arguable to say that each of the numbers have the same probability, of course. So probably somebody could choose 1, somebody could choose 6, somebody could choose 7, but each of number has the same probability to be chosen, which is 1 out of 10, which is 10%. And but for most of the comment, I think thank you, Pak Budi, in particular for the last regression analysis. I also want to point it out that the advantage of having experimental method is actually we can compare directly between one group to another groups, whether the behavior of, in my case, intrinsic honesty is different or not, because we assume that the there is randomness there, and we can claim that the difference is actually because of the treatment. But then we also to be honest, I personally also find that that explanation is not enough, because someone would think that the the difference of uh, uh, lying could also be influenced by other factors. And that's why at the beginning we design an additional questionnaire to measure some of relevant variables that previous literature emphasis correlated with intrinsic honesty, such as, for example, the rate of income and cognitive reflection tests. Those two variables are one of the most um, cited variables in the literature of honesty. But then I think that also does not give, like you said, probably we need a more a better approach to link better variables into the models. Um, I think hopefully I could address Pak Budi's comment and questions. And I think the question from Paji is related to.
Okay, yeah. So I think we can move on to Pak Fajri, but before that, Ibu Alpha has a related question that you had mentioned before about ruling out the possible explanations for your results from Ibu atau Bapak Alpha Farah. People might lie less when they get older. So this is a question about other possible explanations might be due to upbringing or religious values and so on. So maybe some discussion of the possible explanation for the behavior of the older people, and actually how old are these the respondents, maybe the question. So before you answer that, let's go back also to Pa Fajri. So the second, his follow-up question is, how should the findings be generalized, since this is based on experimentation? Maybe we can take one more. So 3 questions, ya Pak, from Mbak Ani, Mbak Alfa, about the religious values and so on as explanation, Pak Fajri, and also Ibu atau Bapak Anik Fadila asking about more context, I guess, in the question. So you had mentioned earlier about relinking to corruption, and if they acknowledge that they were lying, so that's a form of honesty. But maybe an example of the kind of the decision behavior. I hope I got that correctly, Ibu Ani, but if you would like to ask directly so that it's clearer what your question is, please raise the hand and I will open the mic. Thank you. Silakan Pak Luri.
Okay, thank you, Lydia. Okay, I think I want to go to Fajri first. Well, he actually, I think, asking the same questions as Mas Eko, I think. Hello, Mas Eko. About the generalizations and understanding the conclusions. I think, yeah. Well, I think I should choose a more careful word. Well, the experiment here is done by inviting students, in particular LPDP students, and of course the in the paper, actually in the full paper, we stress this, that this early finding is actually only shows the behavior of students within the experimental setting, and that's the questions actually always come up when we talk about experimental method, because experimental method we only include small portions of participants, and the issue of external validity is always exists, but at the same time, what I want to emphasize is that um, well, at some point we have the problem with external validity, but in terms of internal validity, in terms of capturing the data of intrinsic honesty, I think somehow this gives us advantage, right? Because it is difficult to capture that of intrinsic honesty of somebody, right? It's difficult to do that. Um, or if you want to get data of intrinsic honesty of different groups of people with have different ages, I think it's probably quite challenging to do that, if not impossible. Okay, and yeah, careful interpretations must be done to when you want to generalize. So I want to make that highlighted, and then a question from Bu Alifa about explanations why the other people are more honest. Yeah, well, um, of course, when we see the result, um, intuitively we think that because the older people they are they have more money, also when they come to the experiment with the same amount of money that they would get with compared to the youth people, the impact could be different, right? And that's what triggered us to find another way to explain this intuitions, whether incomes really affects the behavior in claiming yeses or not. And we found that there is no um, significant result. But how to understand this? Why adult people more honest compared to young people? This is a big question actually, and just to tell you that the older people here is not really that old. So the group two is consists of people who are 1 years old until 14 years old in 1998, and group three are those people who were above 14 years old in 1998. So probably around I don't know 30 of until 50 years old. And I think yes, I agree that we need to understand this, and I think that is questions that not being addressed in our research. Why the older are more honest compared to the youth generations, and um, the rest one is questions from the sorry I can't.
From Ibu Ani, I think the question is, and correct me, Ibu Ani, is it the same kind of behavior that you are comparing with this experiment with what were presented at the context of the study?
Oh yeah, so so we measure the intrinsic honesty by using the mind game, and then earlier we present about an example of the same behavior that is actually occurred in Indonesia, which is corruptions, and those kind of behavior corruptions has been perceived to be exist in the society since the age of kingdom until now. So it's a part of our culture. It's difficult to change, and it just gives uh, us an example of a slow moving institutions, and we want to reflect that fact, whether it is also applied in intrinsic honesty. Um, So yeah, we capture the different behavior with corruptions. We specific on intrinsic honesty. I hope that answer the questions from
Ibu Ani.
Bu Ani.
Ani, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah. Ibu Ani, if you have additional question, please follow up with writing in the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand. Saya ingin juga mengundang bila ada Bapak dan Ibu yang ingin bertanya dalam bahasa Indonesia, itu juga dimungkinkan, silakan. Before we go to the next question,
I think Mas Eko question has not been answered.
I think it has already, and he said he mentioned thank you and good luck with the research. Before we go to the next question, I have a couple of comments, Pak. One is about the repetition. You mentioned that it's 10 times repetition. Was that mentioned to the players before the start of the game? And secondly, maybe after thinking about it, I guess it doesn't matter what number they choose, actually. I think the important thing is if the number that you show is actually randomized. And the number that you show is actually randomized, and to show that the chances are very, very small for that number of respondents to actually have the same number as what you show on screen. Especially if you randomize in 10 repetitions. I find it hard to believe that 30%, for example, will have the matching number. So those are the two comments for me. And I think Pak Budi has additional questions because he has the hand raised. Oh, no, not anymore. Okay. All right.
Yeah. That is so valid, Bu Lydia. So this is the graph showing the theoretical probability of having the same number. So we have binomial distribution here. So having 10% chances to have a success and failure. So binomial, it's always 2, success and failure, yes or no. And then when we talk about 10 repetitions, which is claiming the same yeses for 10 times, it's really, really finite. So it's quite small. So which means that those who claim 10 yeses are most likely does not happen. So we can argue that those people are they lie. That's the I agree with you. But that is actually one of the feature of this mind game to really indicate who is lying and who is not, right? And we argue that those people who claim 0 yeses and 1 yes are grouped as fully honest participants, and those who claim between 2 and 9 yeses are partially honest. They don't claim to the maximum 10 yeses, but then they don't also tell the truth. Yeah, thank you, Bu Lydia.
Okay, thank you. I see a lot of comments from Ibu Alpha. So I want to invite Ibu Alpha if you want to mention the questions or your, I guess not questions, but comments, insights. If you want to say it directly, I have opened your microphone.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether my mic is working. Is it working?
Yes, we can hear you, although not very clear. Maybe you can put the microphone closer to you.
Okay, yeah, because it's not working properly these days. I'm sorry for that. That's why I write my comments on the box. But I'm trying, okay? Let me know if my voice is not clear enough. Okay, basically, this is a very interesting research. So yeah, thank you for the presentations. I have to.
Sorry, Ibu Alpha, but you are not coming through very clear. Maybe
I can understand the questions from the chat box if I might answer the questions.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah, the mic is just broken. So shall I continue?
I think maybe I will just read it. because
Okay.
we are recording the event. So if
Yeah.
the sound, unfortunately, if the sound is not very clear, then the recording will be even less clear.
Yeah.
So
I'm
I think
sorry.
I will.
I'm sorry.
Okay, it's okay, Ibu Alfa. So I will just read it. Ibu Alfa said that regarding intrinsic honesty and institutions, since intrinsic honesty is driven internally, whereas institution by definition creates external incentives, external to the people, this results in changing behavior. So by this definition, political shifting might not be relevant to explain intrinsic honesty. And the second one, the comment is regarding the group one, those born after 1998, their parents were exposed to the authoritarian rules. These values might be passed on to the children. So these G1 are also indirectly exposed to the authoritarian values. Hence, it's difficult to isolate the effect of these groups. Thank you, Ibu Alfa.
Yeah, thank you, Bafa. This is really a good questions and comment. I will go to the second question first. Yes, well, we agree about this um, indirect influence from the parents to their young kids, and yeah, it is yeah, I could say it's almost impossible to isolate groups of people in the wild in the real world, so that they can't really have interactions with the formal institutions through their parents, because yeah, this is lab in the field experiment, so it's difficult. However, we think that to some extent, of course, direct experience with, let's say, autocratic regimes is totally different with indirect experience. You know, when you really experience something in autocracy regime, let's say, and then you compare it with the experience of only seeing from the TV or story from your parents, the feel must be different. And yeah, I wish I have a better method to isolate a group that is exposed to autocracy and democracy, but somehow at this point this is the best available approach. And thank you for that. And the first one, so I think the questions is a bit mixed up between intrinsic honesty and the institutions. Yes, so intrinsic honesty occurred inside someone's belief, right? When someone decided to keep honest or not, we assumes that uh, it is solely driven by intrinsic motivations. So when you choose to become honest or not, it doesn't rely on whether a monitoring system is in place or not. Okay, that's called intrinsic honesty. But then, when you live in a society, when the society is full with people who are honest, okay, when you, let's say, when you see the news full with honest behavior, less corrupt behavior, uh, research shows that those experience become internalized into our self beliefs, and it becomes our intrinsic motivations to follow the norms that holds by the majority of people. So we have this idioms of beggets like. So if you friends with someone who are lie more, you'll be influenced by those people, right? I think that's hopefully give I don't know what do you call it, so simple explanations of how we understand the context of institutions and intrinsic honesty. Um, yeah, I think
Okay.
back
Yeah.
to you, Lydia.
Yeah, there is no more questions in the Q&A box, but if anyone has additional questions or comments or suggestions, feel free to raise your hand or write in the box. Dan juga bisa dalam bahasa Indonesia, silakan bila ingin menanyakan. Maybe before we close the session, if there are any other questions, Pak Luri can explain a little bit about the Indonesia Behavioral Economics Forum. Maybe we have some people interested in doing more work in this area, or some students. What can they do, for example, in terms of following up what the group is doing, or if there is a mailing list or website and so on.
Yeah, thank you, Bu Lydia. So yeah, so in 2016, we some of Indonesians who study experimental economics, we formed this informal forum, so-called Indonesia Data Economics Forums, and then we have now around 100-ish participants who came from different disciplines. It's not only those who learn economics. Some of them came from different backgrounds, such as human factor in psychology and engineering. Some of them came from medical science, and then psychology, of course, and anthropology, sociology, and also architecture, because I just also know that there's a field of in architecture that also quite interested in behavior, how to design a building that could stimulate certain behavior, that kind of things. So yeah, we welcome you if you want to join our WhatsApp group. This is really informal group of scholars, and I think I can send the link, or you can type in Google search engines, Indonesia Data Economics Forum. We have a small website, and then you can contact me if you want to know further about the IBF.
Okay, great. Thanks. I didn't know there is a website. Well, I'll put that in the chat box later on. So we are nearing the end of the session, and I see that there's no more questions or comments, and not on the YouTube. So with this, I send appreciation, and maybe if you want to post your reaction, for example, clapping reaction or thumbs up reaction from the bottom, you can do so. Thank you very much, Pak Luri, for your time. And we look forward to perhaps having a paper later published to share with the audience. And hopefully this will encourage people to do more research in this area. It's not cheap to do this. It's expensive, but there are some potentially interesting results from using this method. So I close for now. Thank you, everyone, and see you in the next FKPs. Before I close the room, I will put up a list of our additional activities during January and also February for Forum Kajian Pembangunan, hosted by the ANU Indonesia Project for the month of January. Thank you, everyone. Sampai jumpa. Selamat makan
siang. Thank you, Pak Bu Lydia. Thank you, Pak Budi Reso. Thank you all. Thank you so much.